In virtually all of the great spiritual and philosophical traditions of the world, there appears some form of the idea that most human beings are sleepwalking through their own existence. Enlightenment is identified with waking up. Evolution and progress are identified with an expansion of consciousness. Why is consciousness so important? Because for all species that possess it, consciousness is the basic tool of survival. It is the ability to be aware of the environment in some form, at some level, and to guide action accordingly. I use consciousness here in its primary meaning, that is, the state of being conscious or aware of some aspect of reality. To the distinctively human form of consciousness, with its capacity for concept formation and abstract thought, we give the name mind. We are beings for whom consciousness at the conceptual level is volitional. This means that the design of our nature contains some extraordinary options, that of seeking awareness, or not bothering, or actively avoiding it, that of seeking truth, or not bothering, or actively avoiding it, that of focusing our mind, or not bothering, or choosing to drop to a lower level of consciousness. This capacity for self-management is our glory, and at times our burden. If we do not bring an appropriate level of consciousness to our activities, if we do not live mindfully, the inevitable penalty is a diminished sense of self-efficacy and self-respect. We cannot feel competent and worthy while conducting our lives in a mental fog. Our mind is our basic tool of survival. Betray it, and self-esteem suffers. Through the thousands of choices we make between thinking and non-thinking, being responsible toward reality or evading it, we establish a sense of the kind of person we are. Consciously, we rarely remember these choices, but deep in our psyche they are added up, and the sum is that experience we call self-esteem. Self-esteem is the reputation we acquire with ourselves. We are not all equal in intelligence, but intelligence is not the issue. The principle of living consciously is unaffected by degrees of intelligence. To live consciously means to seek to be aware of everything that bears on our actions, purposes, values, and goals. Seek to the best of our ability, whatever that ability may be, and then to behave in accordance with that which we see and know. This last point bears emphasis. Consciousness that is not translated into appropriate action is a betrayal of consciousness. Living consciously means more than seeing and knowing. It means acting on what one sees and knows. Thus, I can recognize that I have been unfair and hurtful to my child, or my spouse, or my friend, and I need to make amends. But I don't want to admit I made a mistake, so I procrastinate, claiming that I am still thinking about the situation. This is the opposite of living consciously. At a fundamental level, it is an avoidance of consciousness. Living consciously is living responsibly toward reality. We do not necessarily have to like what we see, but we recognize that wishes or fears or denials do not alter facts. If I desire a new outfit, but need the money for rent, my desire does not transform reality and make the purchase rational. If a statement is true, my denying it will not make it false. When we live consciously, we do not confuse the subjective with the objective. We do not imagine that our feelings are an infallible guide to truth. We can learn from our feelings, to be sure, and they may even point us in the direction of important facts, but this will entail the participation of reason. Let us look more closely at what the practice of living consciously includes. Living consciously entails a mind that is active rather than passive, an intelligence that takes joy in its own function, being in the moment without losing the wider context, reaching out toward relevant facts rather than withdrawing from them, being concerned to distinguish among facts, interpretations, and emotions, noticing and confronting any impulses to avoid or deny painful or threatening realities, being concerned to know where I am relative to my various goals and projects and whether I am succeeding or failing, being concerned to know if my actions are in alignment with my purposes, searching for feedback from the environment so as to adjust or correct my course when necessary, persevering in the attempt to understand in spite of difficulties, being receptive to new knowledge and willing to re-examine old assumptions, being willing to see and correct mistakes, seeking always to expand awareness, a commitment to learning, and therefore a commitment to growth as a way of life, a concern to understand the world around me, a concern to know not only external reality, but also internal reality, the reality of my needs, feelings, aspirations, and motives, so that I am not a stranger or a mystery to myself. A concern to be aware of the values that move and guide me, as well as their roots, so that I am not ruled by values I have irrationally adopted or uncritically accepted from others. All of us can look back over our life and think of times when we did not bring to some concern as much consciousness as was needed. We tell ourselves, if only I had thought more, if only I hadn't been so impulsive, if only I had checked the facts more carefully. Living consciously is both a practice and a mindset, an orientation toward life, and clearly it exists on a continuum. No one lives entirely unconsciously, and no one is incapable of expanding his or her consciousness. If we reflect on this issue, we will notice that we tend to be more conscious in some areas of our life than in others. I have worked with athletes and dancers who are exquisitely aware of the slightest nuances within their bodies, and yet who are quite unaware of the meaning of many of their emotions. We all know people who are brilliantly conscious in the area of work and are catastrophes of unconsciousness in their personal relationships. The ways we know what area of our life needs more awareness are usually fairly obvious. We look at the area where our life is working least satisfactorily. We notice where the pains and frustrations are. We observe where we feel least effective. If we are willing to be honest, this is not a difficult task. Once you identify the areas in your life where you are at your most conscious, and also the areas where you are your least conscious, the next step is to reflect on what seems to be difficult about staying in high-level mental focus in the troublesome areas. You might find it stimulating to consider the following questions. If you choose to be more conscious at work, what might you do differently? If you choose to be more conscious in your most important relationships, what might you do differently? If you choose to pay more attention to how you deal with people, associates, employees, customers, spouse, children, or friends, what might you do differently? If you feel fear or reluctance to expand consciousness in any of these areas, what are the imagined negatives you are avoiding? If, without self-reproach, you bring more consciousness to your fears or reluctance, what might you notice? If you wanted to feel more powerful and effective in the areas where your consciousness has been less than it needs to be, what are you willing to do? Without self-acceptance, self-esteem is impossible. In fact, it is so intimately bound up with self-esteem that one sometimes sees the two ideas confused. Yet they are different in meaning, and each needs to be understood in its own right. Whereas self-esteem is something we experience, self-acceptance is something we do. I think of my first marriage when I was 22 years old. I think of all the signs that we were making a mistake, the numerous conflicts between us, the incompatibilities in some of our values, the ways in which at the core we were not each other's type. Why then did I proceed? Because of our shared commitment to certain ideas and ideals, because of sexual attraction, because I desperately wanted to have a woman in my life, because she was the first person from whom I did not feel alienated, and I lacked confidence that another would come along, because I naively imagined that marriage could solve all the problems between us. There were reasons, to be sure. Still, if someone had said to me, or if I had somehow thought to say to myself, if you were to bring a higher level of consciousness to your relationship with Barbara and to do so steadily, day after day, what do you suppose might happen? If I had said that, I have to wonder what I might have been led to come to grips with. To a mind that is receptive, so simple yet provocative a question can have astonishing potency. The fact was, I examined neither the feelings driving me toward marriage nor the feelings signaling danger. I did not confront the logical and obvious questions. Why marry now? Why not wait until more is resolved between you? And because of what I did not do, my self-esteem suffered a subtle wound, although it would be years before I fully understood this. There is an exercise that I give to therapy clients today that I wish I had known about then. The course of my life over the next decade or so might have been different if for 2 weeks I sat at my desk each morning and wrote the following incomplete sentence in my notebook. If I bring a higher level of consciousness to my relationship with Barbara, if I had then written 6 to 10 endings as rapidly as I could, without rehearsing, censoring, planning, or thinking, I would have found myself making more and more conscious, explicit, and inescapable all the deep reservations I had about this relationship, as well as my process of avoidance and denial. I have given this exercise to clients who are confused or conflicted about some relationship, and the result almost invariably is major clarification. Sometimes the relationship radically improves. Sometimes it ends. Had I known to use this technique, I would have had to face the fact that loneliness was driving me more than admiration. If Barbara had done a similar exercise, she would have realized that she was no more rational than I in what we were preparing to do. Whether we would have had the courage and wisdom to stay at this higher level of awareness is something I can only speculate about now. Judging from the experience of my clients, it would have been extraordinarily difficult for us to persist blindly on our course, because we would no longer have been blind, and opening one door clears the way to opening another, and then another.